Friends, I am delighted to be here at the invitation of Dr. Chinmaya Pandya, and it's so nice to be in the campus of the Dev Sanskriti Vishwavidyalaya. It's a lovely campus, the setting is very nice, and therefore this is actually the ideal place where we begin our conversation about the Indian civil services, not just about the IAS and the IPS, but all the services which are recruited through the Union Public Service Commission. Friends, let me begin by mentioning that the UPSC is one of the most respected institutions in the country, not only in the country, but across the globe. The impartiality, the fairness, the precision, and the timeliness of UPSC has always been accepted. Therefore, the exam that you are going to be taking is an exam which is being conducted by an impartial authority. That's something very, very important, because this is a test of your competence, it's a test of your commitment, it's a test of your ability to put in long and hard hours of work. So whoever becomes a civil servant in this country is becoming a civil servant because he or she has worked hard for it. It is not something which can be inherited from mother to daughter or father to son or brother to sister. It is something for which you have to work, and working hard with intelligence is what helps us to succeed in this exam. But let me not just keep on telling you about how tough it is and how difficult it is. Let me take you to a little journey of how the IAS and the other civil services began in this country, how in many ways we are a successor to the ICS, and how in many ways we are different from the ICS. Because administration is all about incremental changes and about bringing these changes incrementally and consciously. Because it's very important for us to know what we are and what we are trying to be. You know, when you take this exam, you've already decided that you are not a revolutionary, you're not a person who's going to rebel. You've also decided that you're not going to be a mass leader. You've also decided that you're not going to be writing opinion pieces in newspapers to change the tone, tenor and politics of this country. You have decided to become a professional governance expert, which means that you are different from others who are in different professions. And every profession has a certain creed about itself. The civil services too has a creed, and that creed is that we will bring about changes within the ambit of the Indian Constitution, which is the defining force for us, which is also the fountainhead for our existence, because it is through Article 311 that all of us have got the strength, all of us have got the position, and all of us have also got the responsibility to serve the country without fear or favor across political parties, across states, and across time. So let's go back to a little bit of a history and see, very few people, some people, those of you who are studying history would know, but many may not know that one of the demands of the Indian National Congress from the 1890s was that simultaneous examination should be held for the ICS, both in India and in England, because we felt the people, those who were in the public sphere at that time felt that a country should be able to produce her own civil servants, people who would have a complete commitment to their country. And it was only by 1922 that simultaneous examinations were recorded. We got the right to have examinations in India also. Therefore, the demand for Indians to be in the Indian civil service and to manage the affairs of the country, because how do you run a country? You do not run the country only by politics, you do not run the country only by administration, you do not run the country only by voluntary action, you do not run the country only by being entrepreneurs. To run a nation as complex as ours, you need good people everywhere. You need good people in politics, you need good people in bureaucracy, you need good people in enterprises. Therefore, it is not that we can run this country only if we have brilliant officers in the government. You will need to work with, interact with all the others as well. But let's go on to the evolution of the IAS and how it emerged from the ICS. You see, what happened was that after the 1935 Government of India Act, it was very clear that India is going to be running itself both through the Government of India and through the provinces. And then the question came up on whether provinces should have their own civil service or whether the ICS should serve both the center and the states. After that, of course, immediately after that, we had the World War, and before India's independence, the Secretary of State wanted to abolish the ICS, but Sardar Patel stepped in and said, this is not correct. You cannot leave the country without a civil structure, without a structured civil service, and therefore he insisted that the covenant of the ICS should be shifted from the Secretary of State to the Governor General and then the President of India. So what happened was that in 1947, we had the first exam for the IAS and for all the other services, and from then on, we've had the continuous tradition of having an exam for the civil services, and this is an exam which over a period of time has attracted diverse people. You see, there was a time in the ICS times, of course, very few people could sit for the exam because it was it was a tough examination. It was being conducted only in English, and to appear for the ICS, the application fees was 100 rupees. 100 rupees at that time in 1947 was a very big sum of money. So one of the first decisions that was taken was that the fees of the ICS exam, IAS exam, was reduced from rupees 100 to rupees 25 so that more and more people could take the exam. Now I'm telling you the history of this exam just to give you an idea of how tough it is to get into the civil services today than it was in those times, because today just about 1 million people take this exam, or at least make an effort to take this exam. Therefore, what has happened is that democratization has happened. You can take this exam in any language. Not only that, aspirations have grown. And contrary to the earlier times when only people who had a liberal arts background, people who had studied history and political science and philosophy and sociology and literature were taking the exam, now we have such a wide and such a diverse range of people who are not only willing to take the exam, but are committed to work hard to qualify in this exam, and I celebrate this diversity. So I have seen people who have their first degree in nursing, people who have their first degree in architecture, people who have their first degree in philosophy, people, of course, the numbers from the IITs and from the National Institutes of Technology, from veterinary sciences, from medical profession, law, all this is there. But the very wide range of people who are taking this exam means that this is an exam which a lot of people in our country have a lot of faith in. A lot of people, in fact, I would say that thousands upon thousands of people believe that those who qualify this exam have the responsibility of putting this country on an even course, on a course which is best manifest in the ideals of the Constitution of India. And therefore, friends, not only do I encourage you, not only am I welcoming you to undertake this absolutely fantastic journey, let me also share with you the vision of Sardar Patel when he is sort of established this service and its preeminent role in the governance of the country. You know, without meaning offense to anyone, let's also understand that of the 4 great leaders of the country at that time, Mahatma Gandhi, Sardar Patel, Nehru and Dr. Ambedkar, let me share with you the views of all of them about the civil service. You see, Mahatma Gandhi did not believe in the civil service. He believed that the villages should be empowered, that it should be grassroots democracy, and he believed that people will be able to manage themselves, and he believed in a minimalist state, because his concept about the state and about society and about people was quite different, and one has to respect him for his thoughts, but that is not how a modern state can come about. Dr. Ambedkar, on the other hand, was totally opposed to panchayats. He was totally opposed to these thoughts, because he felt that the state has to be effective and the state has to be strong, because he felt that to transform Indian society, and especially to ensure that the Dalits, the minorities, and all those who are not part of the political mainstream can also be represented, he felt that it is only the civil services which will be able to do this. And he makes this point several times in his works and in his writings. Mr. Nehru had, was okay with the ICS, but he also felt that the bureaucracy in the country should be committed to the political executive, because he felt that the sort of changes which are required in the country, the speed of change which is required, calls for a bureaucracy which will be carrying out the wish of the political executive. Patel, on the other hand, was different from all the rest, and although he had individual differences with many ICS officers, he felt that the system will be able to run well only if you had an impartial bureaucracy which will be able to resist the day-to-day wishes, or sometimes, what happens, what he felt was that sometimes the political leadership may be wanting to do certain things in absolute haste without looking at the very long-term consequences of that. Because Sardar Patel felt and believed, and which many of us also believe today, that a person who is a civil servant knows that he or she has a career for 3 to 4 decades in the civil service. And therefore, the thought that you have when you know that you have to put in 30 to 35 years into a particular career is going to be very different when you are looking at life from a slightly short-term perspective of 5 years or 10 years. And that is why there is bound to be some conflict of opinion sometimes between the political leadership and perhaps those who are going to implement it. But the commitment of the civil service has to come and has to be derived from the constitution of this country, which very clearly lays down what our ideals are, what our objectives are. It clearly lays down how the rights are made, how duties have been laid down, and how we have to balance. The civil servant has to balance essentially 3 very interesting, slightly different pods, but which together make the very beautiful bouquet of governance in this country. You see, one is fundamental rights, the second is fundamental duties, and the third is directive principles of state policy. So, a civil servant in this country is supposed to be well versed with the fundamental rights, because it is these rights which have to be enforced. And now, I will specifically talk about 3 rights which have recently been enacted: the right to food, the right to work, and the right to education, in addition, of course, to the right to information which we have had for nearly 2 decades now. Now, these rights that are there, the civil servant will be directly involved in the right to food, the right to work, and the right to education. So, whether you are in the IAS or you are in the IPS, or when you are raising resources from one of the revenue services, or when you are auditing and accounting the larger processes, one will find that a lot of our time, especially of district officers, is going into the enforcement of these rights, which is so important. And then you come to fundamental duties, which includes the duty to promote excellence in everything that we do. And we link all this with the directive principles, some of which we have been able to achieve, like Panchayati Raj. To a large extent, we have been able to get the format of the directive principles in shape, but still we have to infuse life into this. So, this tripod and this balancing between fundamental rights, fundamental duties, and directive principles is going to be one of the core concerns of civil servants. And it is the advantage that we have in our country is that civil servants, especially those in the IAS, will get to work at all levels. You will get to work at the level of the Zilla Panchayat, you will get to work at the level of the state government, and you will get to work at the level of the Government of India, and you could also be posted abroad in certain assignments. So it's a very comprehensive coverage of things that you will be doing, of areas that you will be covering, and this brings us to the next question. How can you be a generalist and also be a specialist? Is a question which is often asked. the question about lateral entry, which is affecting several people. The point that we got to understand is that we may not be specialists, and we are not specialists of any particular sector, but we are specialists of the context. How those things have to be placed in a context is the core specialization of the civil servant. So we are not specialists of the domain, but we are specialists of the context. And remember that everything that we do in life has to be placed in a context. So, as a very famous book of Mr. Arif Muhammad Khan, the governor of Kerala, it's titled Text and Context. And he goes on to argue that any textual statement has to be placed in a context. So, whether it is the message of Shri Krishna to Arjun in the Mahabharata, or whether it is a dialogue between two people, everything has to be placed in the context and in the circumstances. And something which is good in context A may not be applicable to context B. And therefore, what will be applicable when and how a thing should be made applicable, that is the specialization of the context specialist, and that is what governance is all about. Governance is all about knowing why to do, when to do, and how to do. It is not about the specifics. For instance, if we have to make an intervention in agriculture, or if we have to make an intervention in industries, to make an intervention in say space sciences, that is certainly the job of the specialist. But how and when it will be done, when and how will, for example, you have the farm laws that is currently occupying top news today. Not top news, but was the news about 3 or 4 months ago. Well, the actual task of production, the actual task of enhancing production is that of the agricultural specialist. How agricultural trade will happen, how procurement will take place, what is the kind of policy that NEFED will apply when it procures pulses, whether we import pulses or whether we improve the strength of this country to have more pulses. So, you are talking about how a civil servant has to be a specialist of the context. And the beauty is that we get to serve, and this context becomes clear to us because we serve at many different levels, and that is what makes governance and civil services in our country so different from anywhere else in the world. You see, you could be very bright and very good and very competent, and without meaning to be disrespectful to smaller countries like Bhutan or Bangladesh or Maldives or Nepal, civil servants there serve a unitary political system. That is, you work only for Bangladesh or for Nepal. So, this entire diversity in India, for example, if I take my own example, I have had the privilege of working in West Bengal, within West Bengal, in Darjeeling, which was so different from the rest of Bengal, of working in Uttarakhand, or working for the Government of India, or being on an assignment with the World Bank. So, what happens is that the range of conversations, the range of intersections that we get to have is so very different from those of a civil servant who are working only for one particular government or only in one particular department. A civil servant in Whitehall of UK never gets to serve the government of Scotland, never gets to work in Birmingham, never goes to Northern Ireland. But a civil servant in India would work for 2 or 3 state governments, will work for the union government, will conduct elections throughout the country, and as a director or as a joint secretary in the Government of India will be covering the entire domain of this country, will be covering the entire length and breadth of this country. And this is a very unique experience. So, apart from other things, I think apart from the fact that you get to serve this country, you also get to understand the very great and the very diverse country that we have. And when we talk about our country, look at it from Ladakh to Lakshadweep. Look at the range, look at the diversity, look at the languages, look at the cultures, look at the people. So, joining the civil services is a great opportunity, perhaps an unparalleled opportunity, because no other job anywhere can give you the sort of role, the sort of responsibility, the sort of duties which you will get here. Now, we come to a point which I am sure all of you are interested in knowing. How is it difficult, is it easy, How does one prepare for it? Now, let me give you my thoughts on this subject. It is certainly a very tough exam. It is, if I could say, the toughest exam anywhere, anytime in the world. It is the toughest exam. Having said that, 700 to 800 people qualify every year for the civil services, which means that it is tough, but it is not an impossible task. Also, it shows, because the last few years that I have been in the academy, I have seen that while 5 to 6% people are fortunate enough to qualify in the first attempt, a large number of people qualify in the second or third attempt, and there are people who qualify in the sixth attempt and seventh attempt, and all of them are competent, all of them are bright. I must mention here that apart from hard work, which you all have to do, there is also an element of luck, there is also an element of chances and circumstances that some people are just luckier than the rest, which does not mean that those who make it in the first attempt are anyway better than those who join the service after 2 attempts or 3 attempts. And there are many examples to show this. I mean, in my batch, the topper was in the IPS in 82, and then he did not qualify the prelims in 83, and in 84 exam he topped. So, you know, all these things are there. So keep faith. Commitment and determination are the hallmarks to success, not only for this exam, but anywhere. Now, what one has to understand in this, for this exam, is that it is not an examination of your competence in a particular field. It is an exam of your ability to relate concepts to practice. It is your ability to relate, say, the concept of Swarajya to the present context. It's your ability to locate or to understand, I mean, the role of economic growth in a particular context. So, not only do you have to understand left-wing extremism, you have to understand what is the impact of left-wing extremism on socio-economic development. So, you know, when you are looking at issues in Jammu Kashmir, when you are looking at issues in the northeast, you got to understand the domain and the context. So, that is very important. So, my advice to all young officers or all young people who are taking the exam is, there are also 2 things which you have to keep in mind. One, that a lot of us spend a lot of time in preparing for the exam, but we do not write down what we have learned. Ultimately, in this examination, the only thing that the UPSC examiners will be able to determine is what you have written in the paper, because we do not know, nobody knows how much you know. The exam is about how much you can reproduce in that limited time on the question paper that you have. So, that is the one success mantra which I like to share with you, that you got to rehearse and write whatever you have learned. And second thing which I must say is that prepare your own notes. Do not bank upon anybody to give you the notes, because if you are preparing somebody else's notes, then you obviously have not been able to go deeper into the subject. So, if the question that you get is related not to a specific question that you have learned, but about a general context, then you might find it a bit tricky. In any case, you have to have your own way of writing the answer, because that is what is going to give you the inner strength to take this exam. So, friends, I would advise you to read extensively, both the general studies, most of the newspapers that you can scan, the Government of India publications, the subject that you are taking, I mean, in its entirety, and prepare your own notes, because when you prepare your own notes, half your learning is done. Half your learning is done when you have written down what you are going to write, and that will also give you an idea of how much time it's going to take you to write your exam, to write the answer when you actually got to do it, because often the problem is that you know so much about a particular thing that when you are asked to put the same thing that you know in 10 minutes in 600 words or 800 words or whatever the examination asks you to do, then you might find a little problem in that. So, friends, it's a lovely journey. The journey of the civil services is something which is absolutely fascinating. I started this journey many years ago. 84 I took the exam, 85 I joined the LBS, National Academy of Administration, Missouri. Never thought that I'll end up being the director of this lovely academy. And let me tell you that, many times one gets posted to places one has never heard of before. When I got my first posting as Assistant Magistrate Purulia, I had not heard about Purulia. I had not heard about Purulia. Now, Purulia was part of the old Manbhum district, and because I am a student of history, let me tell you the story of Manbhum, Birbhum and Singhbhum. You see, when Raja Man Singh, Akbar's great general, conquered this area, he had already received the highest rank that a Mughal Mansabdar could have achieved. And therefore, the question came up before Emperor Akbar that what is the reward that can be given now? So, you've already reached the highest scale. So, he decided that all the area that has been won by Raja Man Singh will be named Manbhum, Singhbhum and Birbhum, Bir Man Singh. So, that is how this area of Birbhum, Manbhum and Singhbhum was called. And Purulia was a part of Manbhum. My next posting was in Kalimpong, which again is something I had not heard of before. One had heard about Darjeeling, but one had not heard about Kalimpong. Kalimpong again has a very unique history. In fact, Tibet claimed, Tibet did not recognize India for 3 years after 1947 because it said that, look, Darjeeling, Kalimpong and Tawang in Arunachal are part of Tibet and they are not a part of India. So, from Purulia to Kalimpong, to Khatal in Midnapur, which was part of the old Tamilipti port, and then Cooch Behar, where one sat down and contributed to writing the white paper on the transfer of Teen Biga, to Murshidabad, to West Bengal, to the World Bank, to being Secretary to Governor in Bengal, Secretary Agriculture there, 4 secretaryships in Uttarakhand. So, I mean, the range of experiences has been so diverse, it's been so wonderful. One has been able to travel the whole of the country, one has been able to travel many countries across the world, represented India at several forums and been a part of several, UN bodies and things. So, I think it's been a very, very fulfilling experience for me. And when I say this for a lot of my batchmates. Most of us have had very fulfilling experiences in the civil services. It is good for your personal growth. It is good for your professional growth. It is good for the growth of the nation. So, this is one of those few jobs where your growth, the growth of your personality, the growth of your family, the growth of the nation is all in here together. Therefore, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat. God bless you all. Do very well. Thank you.
हमारे YouTube चैनल शांति कुंज वीडियो गायत्री परिवार को सब्सक्राइब करें एवं बेल आइकन जरूर दबाएं ताकि गायत्री परिवार की विभिन्न गतिविधियों की जानकारी आपको मिलती रहे।